Right? Shall we start the class? Yeah, good afternoon, one and all. Today, in the morning session, we have already discussed about interprocess communication mechanisms. Under the interprocess communication mechanism, we have a shared memory and then message passing. Right? So, meanwhile, let the other people join. So, I will remind you the previous class. Okay? Shared memory. Under the shared memory, we need to talk about producer and consumer problem. Okay, where the producer can produce the item and consumer can consume the item. The producer has to check whether the buffer is full or buffer is full or not, whereas consumer has to check whether the buffer is empty or not. Okay, so why? Because if the buffer is full, the producer cannot produce the items. Okay, if already the buffer is full, the producer cannot produce the items, and the buffer is empty, the consumer cannot consume the items. So that is the reason why the producer and the consumer has to check the conditions before produce an item and before consume an item. Okay, so that is about shared memory, right? And the next one is message passing. So under the message passing, we have to discuss about direct communication and indirect communication. And then what we need to discuss, we need to discuss about synchronization. And then we need to talk about buffering, right? So coming to direct communication and indirect communication. So under the direct communication, we have two primitives. One is send primitive and the second one is the receive primitive, right? So what are the direct communication? Under the direct communication, send p comma message, receive q comma message. Okay, send p comma message means send message to p, send message to p. Receive q comma message is receive message from q. Okay, under the direct communication, this is the first variety, send message to p and receive message from q. That means in this particular example, we have two processes, p and q. We are sending a message to P and receiving message from Q. That means there is only one communication link between the processes. There is only one communication link and there is only two processes communicating with each other. Okay, this particular link may be unidirectional or it may be bidirectional. So these are the properties of send and receive primitives. Okay, what is the first property? There are only two processes communicating with each other, and the second property is there is only one communication link, and the third property is the link may be two directional. Okay, so those are the points under the first variety. And the second variety is send p comma message, and the next one is receive id comma message. That means here the sender for whom we are sending the message, process P. That means we are sending message to P, but here we are not mentioning the particular process name. What we mentioned? ID. Okay, we mentioned ID. That means we are receiving message from any process. We are receiving message from any process. Okay, so these are the two varieties under direct communication. Okay, what about indirect communication? In the case of indirect communication, indirect means there is no direct communication between the processes. So what a process will do? So process will send a message to mailbox, and receiver can receive the information. Receiver can receive information from mailbox. Okay, that means, so in order to make the indirect communication possible, first what we need to do? We need to create mailbox. We need to create mailbox, and then we need to send or receive messages from the mailbox. And the third one, we can delete the mailbox. After send and receive, we can delete the mailbox. Okay, so these are the things we need to discuss under indirect communication. Why it is called as indirect communication? There is no communication between the process. If anyone want to send a message, we need to send a message to the mailbox, and anyone want to receive the message, they need to take the message from the mailbox. That means mailbox will work as a mediator between the sender and the receiver. Through mailbox the communication is possible. So for that purpose, here the send and receives. In order to send and receive the messages, we need to follow these three steps. We need to create the mailbox, and then we need to send a message to the mailbox, and we need to receive the message from the mailbox, and after that we can delete the mailbox. Okay, that is the thing. Waiting room. Why they are in the waiting room? I didn't create any. Okay, I will check. So no one is there in the waiting room. I have never create a session like that, ma. I didn't. I didn't enable the waiting room actually. I did not enable it.
Okay,
So directly.
okay, ma'am. Some students told me that they're waiting in the waiting room. That's why I told you, ma'am.
So if it is the case now, I need to admit all of you already. And the 43 participants are there now. So I need to
Yes,
allow
ma'am.
all the participants, right? I didn't enable that. Right? So that is about direct communication and indirect communication. Okay. And next coming to synchronization and buffering. Let me clear the screen. So what is synchronization? One second, ma. Give me one minute. Okay, under the synchronization, we need to talk about 4 points. What are those? 2 points for about sender and 2 points for receiver. What are those? The first one is blocking send, blocking send, and the second one is non-blocking send. right? Under the receiver also, we have two varieties. So what are those? Blocking receive, and the next one is non-blocking receive. Okay, so what is blocking send? That means sender will block. Sender will block. Sender will block until the message is received by receiver. Until the message is received by a receiver. So that is called as blocking send. That means whenever a sender sends a message, the receiver has to wait until the receiver receive the message. That is called as blocking send. So what is non-blocking send? Non-blocking send means sender will never block. Sender will never block. That means sender can continuously send the messages. Whether the receiver is receiving or not, sender will never block. The sender can continuously send the message. Okay. The sender will not wait for the receiver. But in the case of blocking send, the sender will block until the message is read by the receiver. Okay. That is called as blocking send and non-blocking send. And the next one, blocking receive, non-blocking receive. That means here the receiver will wait. The receiver will block. The receiver will block until the message is available. Until the message is available. Right? What it means? That means, for example, as I told you earlier, what is synchronization? There should be some synchronization between the communication parties. After writer is writing something, then only the reader is allowed to read. That means writer has to write first. Writer has to write first. After that, the reader can read the message. That means reader has to wait until the writer writes something. So there should be some synchronization between the writer and the reader. Likewise, producer, consumer. Okay, what the consumer has to do? The consumer has to wait for the producer to produce an item into the buffer, right? In the similarly, blocking receive means the receiver will be blocked. The receiver will be blocked until the message is available in the buffer. Okay. Whereas non-blocking means the receiver will never block. The receiver will never block. The receiver will never block. That means if the message is not available, the receiver will receive null message. The receiver will receive null message. Even if the message is not available, the receiver will not be blocked in the case of non-blocking. So these are the four varieties under synchronization. Okay, blocking send, non-blocking send. Blocking send means sender will block until the message is received by the receiver. Non-blocking send means the sender will never block for the receiver. Okay, sender will continuously send the message. Whether the receiver are receiving the message or not, the sender will not block. That is about non-blocking send. What is blocking receive? Blocking receive means the receiver will block if the message is not available. Okay, that means the receiver has to be blocked until the message is available. Okay. Non-blocking receive means the receiver will never block. Even if there is no messages also, the receiver will receive null messages. Okay. That is the thing. That is about synchronization. Second concept in message passing. Okay. And next coming to third one. What is third one? Last one. Buffering. So under the buffering, we need to talk about three concepts. What is zero capacity, And the next one is the bounded capacity. And then third one is unbounded capacity. Okay, zero capacity means what are these? What are all these? So initially, what is buffer? A buffer is a temporary storage area. What a buffer is? A buffer is a temporary storage area. Okay, what will be the size of the buffer? We need to talk about size of the buffer. Capacity means so zero capacity, bounded capacity, unbounded capacity. So what is zero capacity? Zero capacity means so whenever the sender send a message, sender message will, will be immediately received by the receiver. Okay, the sender message will be immediately received by the receiver. Why? Because it is a zero capacity buffer means so buffer cannot hold the message, so that the send whenever the sender send a message, immediately the receiver has to receive the message. That is called as zero capacity. And the next one is bounded capacity. What is bounded capacity? Bounded capacity means buffer has limited size. Okay, that means for example buffer has the capability to store the 5 messages. So the sender can send 5 messages to the buffer. The sender can send 5 messages to the buffer, and the receiver can receive messages from the buffer. The sender can send the message to the buffer, and next to the receiver can receive from the buffer. This is sender and this is the receiver. For example, it might be the buffer. It has the capability to hold 5 messages. Okay, so whenever the sender send a message, automatically one message, the buffer has the capability of holding 4 more messages, and then the sender can able to send one more message. After that, the buffer has a capability to hold 3 more messages. Like that, the sender can send up to 5 messages. Okay, so after the 5 messages, the consumer is not consuming anything. That means at that time, what will happen? The buffer is full. When the buffer is full, the sender unable to send the message. Again, the receiver start reading the message from the buffer. Whenever the receiver take out a message from the receiver, again the sender has a chance to send a message. Like that, sender is sending something messages to the buffer, and receiver receive the messages from the buffer. If the buffer is full, the sender cannot send the message. If the buffer is empty, the receiver cannot receive the messages. So that is about bounded buffer. That means limit. There is a limit in the buffer size. And next, unbounded. Unbounded means unlimited. Unbounded means unlimited. That means the sender can send any number of messages. Can send any messages to the buffer. Why? Because there is no limit. Okay, that is about buffering. So all these are the concepts under inter-process communication mechanism, message passing technique. Okay, and the next one, so what we need to talk about is threading. So threading, right? What is a thread? Thread is nothing but part of a process, right? Usually we call it as unit part of a process. Okay, a process can have any number of threads. Usually threads can share Threads can share process, code area, and then data, and then files. So all these things are shareable to the threads. Okay. And next, what is the difference between process and thread? What is the difference between process and thread? Thread is lightweight, whereas a process is heavyweight. So why process is called as heavyweight process? Why? Because process requires more resources. Process requires more resources, whereas lightweight process thread requires less resources. Okay, that is the difference between process and a thread. So what are the benefits of using the thread? So what is the need of dividing the process into threads? Okay, what is the need of dividing the process into unit of parts called threads? The first one is speed up, computational speed up. Okay, the computational speed up will be more. Why? Because, for example, we are dividing the process into 3 threads. These 3 threads are the parts of the process, right? They can be assigned to individual CPUs. They can be assigned to the individual CPUs. So all the 3 threads can run parallelly. So whenever the 3 threads run parallelly, so automatically we can complete the task within less time. If you are not dividing the process into the threads, what will happen? There might be a only single thread. Entire process is a single thread, so that we can assign the single thread to the entire single thread to a CPU. Okay. So for example, in order to complete a task, we require 30 minutes, 30 minutes of a time. If it is a single thread, in order to accomplish the task, it requires 30 minutes. If we divide the thread into multiple, if we divide the process into multiple threads, automatically we can divide a process into different parts and we can assign them to the CPUs, so that we can finish the task within 10 minutes. So computational speed up. And the next one is economy. Economy means automatically, as I told you earlier, process consumes more system resources and the thread consumes less system resources. So automatically it will take very less time to create a thread when compared to process. Less time to create a thread and less time to create and execute a thread. So thread execution time as well as creation time is very less when compared to the process. Okay. And next, multi-processor architecture. Threads allow multi-processors. Multi-processors means multiple processors architecture, right? That means multiple number of processors. If you observe here, there are 3 processors, right? All the 3 processors are assigned 3 threads, so that all the 3 can run at the same time. Okay, that is called as multi-processor architecture. And next, there are 2 types of threads. What are those? What are the 2 types of threads? One is a user level thread. One is user level thread.
Kernel thread.
And the second one is kernel level thread. Okay. So what is user level thread? It is created by the user. It is created by the user. One second. Created by user in user area. And next, what is kernel level thread? Created by OS or kernel in kernel area. It is user level thread is simple to create / manage. Whereas in the case of kernel thread, level threads are taking more time to create and costly. Why? Because they are created in the kernel area. Okay. And next, what are the different models? Threading models. There are 3 varieties of threading models. The first one is many to one. And the next one is one to one. And the third one is many to many. What is many to one? Many to one means many user level threads connected to single kernel level thread. Okay. What is the problem in this model? If one thread will send a blocking system call, automatically all the remaining threads will be blocked. Why? Because there is only one kernel thread. Okay, that is a disadvantage in the many to one. So what about one to one? One to one means, as the name indicates, every thread is having one kernel thread. Every thread has its own kernel thread. Every thread has its own kernel thread. For example, if one thread sends a block system call, automatically it won't create any problem to the remaining threads. That means even after the blocking also, these remaining threads are working normally. Why? Because each and every user level thread has its own kernel level thread. These things will continue even after block. Continue even after block. Okay. And next, what is many to one? Many to one is used to overcome the problems of about two methods, right? So many to, not many to many, many to one. It is many to many. Sorry. So many to means many user level threads, many kernel level threads. But these kernel level threads may not be equal to the user level threads. Here in this case, 4 user level threads, 4 kernel threads. But here in this case, 5 user level threads may be point connected to the, so 3 kernel level threads, right? That means user level threads are more than one, and next to kernel level threads are more than one. So that we no need to create number of kernels equal to the user level threads. That is the problem in one to one. And next, what is many to one problem? If one particular thread creates a block system call, request a block system call, automatically remaining threads will be blocked. That is the problem in many to one. It also solved here. And next, what is the problem in one to one? We require as many number of user level threads are there, that many number of kernel threads we require. That means it is costly. So, but here we don't require that many number of kernels. We have many number of kernels, but they are not equal to user level threads, right? We no need to maintain kernel level threads equal to the user level threads. We maintain many, but not equal to the user level threads. Okay. So that if one user level thread sends a block system call, it won't create any problem for the execution of remaining threads. Why? Because these remaining threads are connected to the other kernels, right? Only few. If it sent a block system call, these two cannot work. Why? Because these two are connected to this kernel. But the user level threads which are connected to the or assigned to the remaining kernel level threads can work properly even after the block system call. So these are the three varieties of threading models. Okay. And next, these by this we can conclude up to threading. Now we need to move to the scheduling, right? So we need to talk about the scheduling. So first of all, what is the scheduling? What is the scheduling criteria? So we need to discuss these things now. So what is scheduling? What is concepts we need to know, learn under the scheduling? And next, what is preemptive scheduling? What is non-preemptive scheduling? And what is a dispatcher? And the next one, what are the scheduling criteria? So first, let me explain about preemptive scheduling and the non-preemptive scheduling. So first of all, what is scheduling? Anyone can able to answer to this question? What is scheduling? So scheduling is nothing but CPU scheduling. So what for CPU scheduling? So initially, as we know, all the programs are available in the job pool, in the secondary memory. Okay. From those job pool, the long-term scheduler will send some subset of the programs from secondary memory, from job pool to main memory. In the main memory, there is a ready queue. Okay, all the programs are in the main memory. It are kept in the all the programs which are in the main memory are kept in the ready queue. Okay, so the programs which are available in the ready queue are waiting for the CPU. For example, in the secondary memory, in a job pool, in a system, for example, we have 10 programs. In those 10 programs, we want to run 3 programs. What we have to do? We need to move those 3 programs from job queue to ready queue. Okay. Now in the ready queue, we have 3 programs. From 3 programs, from 3 programs, from 3 programs, which program need to be allocated to CPU? That is based upon the scheduling algorithms. Okay. So among those 3, one program or one process will be assigned to the CPU. That is called a CPU scheduling. Are you got it? So I repeat once again. Initially, all the programs are in the job pool, waiting in the job queue in the secondary memory. For example, 10 programs. In those 10, we want to run 3 programs. What we need to do? We need to load those 3 programs from secondary memory to main memory. Who will move those 3 programs from secondary memory to main memory? Long-term scheduler will take subset of 3 programs from the job queue. Okay. So, and keep it in the ready queue. So what is the job of short-term scheduler or CPU scheduler? From these 3 which are waiting in the ready queue, one program or one process will be assigned to CPU. Okay, that is the responsibility of short-term scheduler or CPU scheduler. Okay. Now try to read this particular line, top line. Whenever the CPU becomes idle, the operating system select one process in the ready queue. That means, as I told you in our example, 3 processes are in the ready queue in the main memory. From those 3, the CPU become idle. So what we have to do, what the operating system has to do, the start-term scheduler will take one process from those 3 processes and assign it to the CPU. Okay. Here, try to understand this particular line. The scheduler select from among the processes in memory that are ready to execute and allocate to the CPU one of them. Okay. And next, coming to preemptive scheduling, there are two types of scheduling. One is a preemptive scheduling and the second one is a non-preemptive scheduling. So what is preemptive scheduling? What is non-preemptive scheduling? Non-preemptive means once we assign the CPU to process, the process will never release the CPU until it completes its execution. That means in the middle of execution, the process will not release the CPU. But in the case of preemptive scheduling, once we assign the CPU to the process, in the middle of the execution, the process will release the CPU and we assign the CPU to some other process. Have you got my point? For example, I have given a CPU to process 1, P1. In the case of non-preemption, we cannot release the CPU until P1 completes its execution. That is called as non-preemptive. Preemptive means, for example, if you're assigning CPU to P1, suddenly in the P2, which has highest priority, come into the main memory. What we have to do? We need to take out the CPU from P1 and we need to assign to the P2. That is called as preemption. And the other case, for example, P1 requires some IO operation. At that time, we are switching the CPU from P1 to some other process, P2. That is also one more case. And suddenly, whenever there is an interrupt, P1 is executing, the CPU is executing P1. At that time, there might be an interrupt. So automatically, we need to switch the CPU from P1 to some other process. These are all we discussed when we had a discussion about process states: ready state, running state, waiting state. Initially, the process is in the new state, just born state. Whenever it is ready, we need to keep it in the ready queue. That means it is in the main memory waiting for the CPU, and whenever the CPU is idle, we are allocating CPU to the process. At that time, the process move to the running state. So whenever there is a IO operation required, the process again move to the waiting state. From the waiting state, again it will move to the ready state. From the ready state, again we need to move to the running state. Like that, throughout its life cycle, the process is moving from one state to another state. Okay, when we switch the CPU from running state to waiting state, automatically at that time the process is in waiting state, so CPU will become idle. At that time, what we will do? So we need to switch the CPU from that process to another process. So these are all the conditions for the preemptive. Okay, so orally you may not understand this one, so I will try to explain you with the paint. The students who are not able to understand the lines, try to understand now. Okay, for example, there is a process P1. Okay, initially we are assigning CPU to P1. Okay, automatically CPU executing the process. The CPU will be assigned to the process 1 till termination. That means P1 will never release the CPU. Never release the CPU until the termination. Termination or IO. That means if a process requires input-output operation or a process completes its execution, in these two cases only the CPU will be released from the process. So this is called as non-preemptive. So no need to worry even if you are not understanding these things. So at the time of solving the problems of CPU scheduling algorithms, you came to know what is a non-preemptive and what is preemptive. And the next one is preemptive. Preemptive means, for example, CPU is allocated to P1. Okay, suddenly this is the main memory. P1, P2 is there. So we are assigning CPU to P1. So while executing CPU executing the P1. So while executing P1, suddenly a high priority process will came into the ready queue. Ready queue means main memory. Suddenly P3 process came into the main memory, which is having highest priority, than P1. Highest priority than P1. What the operating system will do? So even the P1 not complete its execution, the CPU will be switched from P1 to P3. So that is called as preemption. Okay, before the termination of P1 and before the P1 completes its execution, the CPU will be switched from P1 to some other process. That is called as preemption. So what are the reasons for the preemption? This might be the reason. High priority process came into the ready queue. That is the reason we are moving CPU from P1 to P3. Priority might be the reason. And the second one, time slice. Time slice means, so as I told you, CPU time will be 2 seconds for every process. That means only we are giving 2 seconds of time, 2 milliseconds of time to every process. So how many number of process we need to execute? For example, P1, P2, P3 we want to execute. So automatically whenever P1 requires 4 milliseconds of time, P2 requires only 2 milliseconds of time, P3 requires 6 milliseconds of time. So initially CPU is allocated to P1. So what is the time we will allocate to the individual process? 2 milliseconds. So CPU will execute P1 for 2 milliseconds. So after that, automatically CPU is switched to P2. So P1 requires 4 milliseconds. Only we have given 2 milliseconds. That means in order to complete the P1 process, still we require 2 milliseconds. That means P1 not completed it. Still we are switching the CPU from P1 to P2. Again P2 requires 2 milliseconds. CPU time slice also 2 milliseconds. After 2 milliseconds, it will be automatically switched to P3. That means that is called as preemption. Even P1 is not completes its execution because of the time slice expiration, because the time slice expires, because of that reason we are moving from P1 to P2. So after 2 milliseconds, again we are switching the CPU from P2 to P3. Okay, after 2 milliseconds, actually P3 requires 6 milliseconds, but the CPU time slice is only 2 milliseconds. It requires 4 milliseconds to complete. Why? Because 6 minus 2 means 4 milliseconds. Still the CPU is switching from P3 to P1. Like that, again we have given 2 milliseconds to P1. So after that, again P2. P2 already over in the first round. So again we are switching the CPU to P3. So P3 now requires 2 milliseconds. Again we are giving 2 milliseconds. It requires 2 milliseconds now. Still. Again it will be moved to P1. Like that, from P1 to P2, P2 to P3, again P2, P3 to P1, again P2, again P3, again P1, like that. In the round robin fashion, it will be moved from one process to another process after time slice is over. Okay, so this is also a case for the preemption. That means the process will not complete its execution. Still we are switching the CPU from this process to another process. Okay, the first condition, it may be the priority, it may be the interrupt. Because of the interrupt and we are executing P1, suddenly there is an interrupt occurs. Automatically what happened? We need to take the P1 from running state to ready state. In the case of interrupt, at that time CPU is allocated to some other process. These are all things we have discussed in the case of process states. If you are not understanding this ready to running and running to waiting, so please go through the previous record. In that record, the process states concept you need to revise once. Okay. So preemption, preemptive or non-preemptive. That means all the CPU scheduling algorithms are categorized under these two. Okay, either the algorithm may be CPU scheduling algorithm may be preemptive or it may be the non-preemptive. Okay, so when we discuss the scheduling algorithms in detail, we came to know so that particular algorithm will be comes under the category of preemptive or the algorithm comes under the category of non-preemptive. All the scheduling algorithms are either preemptive or non-preemptive. Some scheduling algorithms are both preemptive and non-preemptive. So these things you came to know when we discuss about scheduling algorithms in detail. Okay. Before going to discuss about the scheduling algorithms, you need to have some idea about IO bound process and CPU bound process. The process are of two types. A process is of two types. It may be IO bound or it may be a CPU bound. So what is IO bound? What is CPU bound? IO bound process means, for example, P1. I can say that P1 is an IO bound. How can I say that PO is IO bound? IO bound means in its program execution, most of the time the process is in doing IO operation and the less time for CPU execution. That means most time, much time the process is busy with IO operation. More time the process is busy with IO operations. Only it requires less CPU time for computation. So such type of process is called as IO bound. Then what is CPU bound? I can say, for example, P2 is CPU bound. How can I say that P2 is CPU bound? A process is a CPU bound. That means in its lifetime, the process requires much CPU time for computation. That means process doing computation more time. Okay, that means it requires CPU much time, right? Only little bit of time for doing IO. That is called as CPU bound. Is it clear for you all? IO bound means the process doing IO operations much time than the computation. Whereas CPU bound means the process consumes much time for doing computations rather than the IO operation. That means input output operations, reading from a disk, reading from a file, writing to a file, such operations are less in the case of CPU bound process. All the time the process is using the CPU, less time for IO. But whereas in the case of IO bound means more time the process is spending more time on IO rather than using the CPU time. That is called as IO bound. So whenever this is a job queue, right? What the long-term scheduler, what long-term scheduler will do from those job queue, what a job queue consists, all the processes are available in the job queue. All processes are available in the job queue. From the job queue, subset of jobs are kept into the main memory. That means in the ready queue. Subset of process are kept in the ready queue. Okay, so it is the responsibility of long-term scheduler to keep mix of IO bound and CPU bound. Ante some process need to be IO bound and some process need to be the IO bound. Okay. So it is the responsibility of long-term scheduler to select such a type of process from secondary memory job queue to main memory ready queue. That means in the main memory, what variety of process need to be there? So it is operating system, and whenever the long-term scheduler keep the programs process into the main memory, these processes need to be the mix of both IO and CPU bound. Okay, not all the processors IO bound, not all the processor CPU bound. It is a responsibility of long-term scheduler to select such a type of process and keep it into the main memory. Okay, main memory ready queue. Okay, up to this point, is it clear for you all? Up to this point, is it clear for you all?
Yes, madam.
Okay, and the next one is a dispatcher. What is a dispatcher? So what is a dispatcher? Dispatcher is responsible for scheduling the CPU to the process. Okay, dispatcher is responsible for scheduling the CPU to process. Okay, so you might read the topics now. So there are two types of scheduling algorithms. One is a preemptive scheduling and the second one is a non-preemptive scheduling. First one, what is non-preemptive scheduling? Once the CPU has been allocated to a process, the process keeps the CPU until it releases the CPU, either by terminating or by switching to the waiting state. That means the process is in the waiting state. So it doesn't require any CPU now until the wait operation complete, until the IO operation completes. At that time, or a process terminates its execution. In these three cases only, the process will release the CPU. Okay, that is called as non-preemptive scheduling. What is preemptive scheduling? Once the process allocated the process, once the processor, that means CPU allocated to the process can be once the CPU allocated to a process, the process can be interrupted and the processor can be preempted. That is called as the process can be allocated to the some other process. Okay. Preempted means it will be moved from that particular process to another process. So we need to switch the CPU from this process to that process. So that is the reason why preemptive scheduling incurs a cost. Why? Because we need to switch the CPU from the context of one process to the context of another process. It requires saving the contents and reloading the contents. So these things you might come across when you discussed about context switching. Okay, so non-preemptive means CPU will never released by the process till it completes its execution or it will be in the waiting state. Preemptive scheduling means once the CPU is allocated to the process, while doing the execution, the process may be release the CPU and assign switch to the another process. That is called as preemptive scheduling. What is dispatcher? Dispatcher is a module that gives control of a CPU to the process. That means the dispatcher will allocate the CPU to the process. Okay, that means that the job of short-term scheduler, nothing but. Okay, what a short-term scheduler will do? Short-term scheduler, another name is CPU scheduler. Okay, the CPU scheduler will select one process from the ready queue and allocate it to the CPU. Okay, what are the roles of a dispatcher? Context switching and switching to user mode and jumping to proper location in the user program to restart that program. That means whenever we are switching from one process to another process, what we need to do, I already told you, we need to resume the operation where we suspended earlier. From that location onwards, we need to continue. So where we are earlier, what is the address location? How can the CPU know that one? The CPU will read the information from the program counter. Program counter holds the address of the instruction to be executed next. Okay, once it come back from the another process, once we return back from the other process, that means after the context switching. For example, now the CPU is executing P1. So because of the IO operation, CPU is switched from P1 to P2. Okay, once the IO operation is completed, now again the CPU has to be switched from P2 to P1. When the CPU is switched from P2 to P1, what we need to do? The CPU has to run where it was earlier. So where it was earlier, that means the P1, the CPU should not start from the starting point. The CPU has to start from the address location which is available in the program counter. Okay, so what is the address location it holds? So the program counter holds the address of the instruction which will be executed next. Okay, that means we need to resume the operation. We should not restart the operation. Okay, so all these things has to be done by the dispatcher. Okay, so usually, as we know, the dispatcher should be fast. Why? Because so if the dispatcher is slow, so automatically it takes much time for switching the CPU from one process to another process. So at that time, CPU time will be waste for the switching rather than using for the computation. Much CPU time used for the switching. That is the reason why the dispatcher is need to be fast, so that we can switch the CPU from one process to another process in a faster manner, so that CPU will be executing more number of programs. Okay, that is the thing. That is the reason why most of the times the switching need to be done less number of time. If the more number of programs in the main memory are IO bound, automatically every time the process is busy with IO operation. So all the time we need to switch the CPU from that process to another process. That is the reason why the mix of process in the ready queue are both IO bound and CPU bound. If most of the process are CPU bound, it will be also a problem. Why? Because if all the processes are CPU bound, then all the processes require more CPU time. So automatically, if the processes are waiting for the CPU will be more. That means if, for example, P1 is CPU bound, P2 is CPU bound, P3 is CPU bound, and P4 is CPU bound. So on only P5 is a IO bound. What happened? So P1 is CPU bound. That means P1 requires more CPU time. So automatically P2, P3, P4 are waiting for the CPU much time. That is the reason why. So the ready queue processes are both IO bound and CPU bound. Okay. So if you have any doubt regarding IO bound and CPU bound, so we'll discuss in the next class. Okay. So make sure everyone need to attend for the tomorrow's class. So most of the time, next now there is the strength of the student is only 37. And most of you might think that we can go through the recorded sessions. What is the need of listening classes online? You might think that. So, but my sincere request to you all is better to listen the classes online. Don't go for the recorded sessions. Why? Because recorded sessions are not interactive sessions, right? So when there is a doubt, you can ask me right now. If it is a recorded session, it won't affect much. Okay, that is the thing. We'll meet in the tomorrow session. So before going to the tomorrow session, you need to have a better idea about preemptive, non-preemptive, and the dispatcher, context switching. Go through those topics if you have a go through the Google. Otherwise, okay. Thank you. So we'll meet in the tomorrow's class. As you have a session after this session, right? So we'll wind up the session now. Thank you.